Steady. Cardio attack higher than expected.
One of the main points of contention between DC and Marvel fans is about how DC Comics has a more of a propensity to give a dark origin story to its character. And I'm not going to fan the flames here, but if you think Marvel doesn't do the same, then let me introduce you to Barry Windsor-Smith's Weapon X. The first hints of Weapon X actually showed up back in 1974 in Wolverine's first cameo appearance. Still, we got the full circle picture only in 1991. It is hands down one of my favorite story arcs across Marvel, because it feels like the perfect love child of the slasher and sci-fi horror genres. Wolverine is one of the most popular characters in Marvel, and sure, it's always a treat to see him in the comics on screen. For all his innate charisma, he had to pay a heavy price to get Adamantium bonded to his skeleton, the details of which most adaptations tend to gloss over. He wasn't some one-off project, he was Logan, part of Team X, and he eventually became the success story. We're going deep on this, pulling from the comics as well as the movies that tried to bring the Twisted Project on screen. Hold on tight because it is going to get disturbing. So who actually invented this nightmare? After he received a script for an 8-page story, Terry Kavanagh, the then editor of Marvel Comics Presents, approached Barry Windsor-Smith to illustrate this script. While the latter was not particularly interested in the script, the whole 8-page format intrigued him because he felt that something so precise, with obvious limits, would be a real challenge for the one doing the writing. Before the first few installments of Weapon X were released, he mentioned in an interview, "I thought it was something rather concise and very testing of one's storytelling abilities, to do an 8-pager and make it sharp and hard rather than these meandering graphic novels. You know how it goes. Once inspiration strikes, results soon follow." A few days after turning down Kavanagh's illustration proposal, Windsor-Smith himself approached the man with the first several finished pages of Weapon X. Naturally, the editor was surprised because he hadn't suggested that storyline in any way. But more importantly, Wolverine belonged to Marvel, so it was completely up to them to publish the story or not. But our guy Barry was adamant. He did not want to go through the whole bureaucratic exercise of asking for permission and making presentations to get the green signal. He had an idea and executed it. And props to him, honestly. The corporate runaround can be exhausting. Fortunately, Kavanagh actually ended up liking the story and gave his approval. Things started moving in the right direction, but then the upstairs people got involved. Marvel's editor-in-chief, Tom DeFalco, and direct sales manager, Carol Kalish, sat down with Terry and announced that they liked the Weapon X arc a bit too much, and it deserved more than a newsstand serials. Instead, they wanted to publish it as a graphic novel with higher quality coloring. This is exactly what Windsor-Smith was unwilling to do, so Kavanagh held his ground. Ultimately, Tom DeFalco agreed to publish Weapon X in Marvel Comics Presents first, and then have it printed in the graphic novel format. But that was not where the internal disagreements ended. You see, the X-Men editorial and creative staff were not involved with Weapon X in any way, but they considered it an origin story for Wolverine. While Windsor-Smith has consistently maintained that he did not intend for his work to be a part of the Mutants mythos, just an entertaining offshoot of sorts, you cannot just read about Weapon X and not think of it as Logan's passage into becoming Wolverine, you know what I mean? There was also a dispute regarding the role of the Professor in Weapon X because Charles Xavier was already popular as the Professor in X-Men mythos. A clash of these two characters with the same names would only confuse fans. Later, when Chris Claremont, who wrote the Uncanny X-Men, told Kavanagh that he had always envisioned Apocalypse to be the one behind Wolverine's Adamantium, Barry Windsor-Smith added the unseen director as a courtesy to Claremont. Even though he felt this decision hindered his plotline, it still left open the option for the director to reveal himself as Apocalypse in the future. As you can see, Weapon X had quite the turbulent publication history. The main reason behind this is that the entire story arc was unplanned. It was something that came to Windsor-Smith's mind unprompted by anyone else, and he created it based on a general concept. He stated that he did not have the complete plot figured out when he started working on it because he wanted it to be spontaneous enough to surprise himself, and only then would it feel unexpected for the readers as well. Looking back, his creative decision was responsible for how legendary Weapon X became, but you can't really blame the X-Men editorial team for the issues they had raised. Wolverine was, after all, extremely well established by that time, and even if it wasn't intended, Weapon X did give him a rather grisly origin story. So what exactly happened in Marvel Comics Presents number 72? The entire Weapon X feature is explored from issues 72 to number 84. So the first one was more of a prologue, with the cover line being before there was Wolverine, there was Weapon X. I have to applaud the imagery right from the first panel, where the professor's glasses on the table draw the attention to secret papers outlining the details of Experiment X, and then magnifying the words to show X-Men through the lens as he picks them up. Meanwhile, Logan spends all his time at a club called The Prophecy, using alcohol to numb his thoughts to the point of total incoherence. He ends up injuring someone at the shooting range thanks to his shaking hands, and is dismissed for chronic alcohol abuse. The drinking does not take away the nightmares, however, and this illustration is simply brilliant. Logan sees blood, spikes, and bones, even though his body suffers from the intoxication he subjects himself to. His mind races at the million thoughts per minute, clinging to the trauma as if it happened just yesterday. In the haze of it all, he picks up the bottle and sees the day's newspaper on the table with the headline, Cornelius, Saint or Murderer? His memories take us through what happened in the past, with the professor welcoming Abraham Cornelius and Carol Hines to the Experiment X team. Such visceral description of body horror and PTSD is something I don't see a lot in comics. Don't get me wrong, there are many other works detailing these themes, but I really like Barry Windsor-Smith's restrained portrayal of Logan's trauma. He doesn't make it mindlessly graphic. It's explored from the survivor's perspective, describing the loss of autonomy. And it's grisly to look at, yes, but it still contains a hint of restraint because the writer tries to show us Logan's memories of events with a sense of respect or pity for the pain that he went through. It's never simply there for shock value, for it's Logan himself recounting his time in this lab. Before the lab, Logan's secret Team X history. Logan wasn't a random target who was kidnapped and forced to undergo this experiment. Marvel has been a little inconsistent with the details of his past, which have been revealed across different stories, so I can understand why some fans might get slightly confused here. For those of you, this is a rundown of who Logan was before Adamantium was pumped into his body. Team X was first mentioned in Wolverine Volume 2, number 48 through 50, in November of 91 to January of 92, written by Larry Hama and penciled by Mark Silvestri. Across these issues, flashback sequences framed Team X as a secret Black Ops group, of which Logan was a part. In the 1960s, Team X operated as a CIA Black Ops unit, linked to the government-backed Weapon Plus program. You have to remember that this was the peak of the Cold War. So, the immediate goal was to create extremely powerful and resilient super soldiers who could be sent into critical missions requiring more skills than the average human spy. Of course, stopping the Soviet Union's advancement was not the only intention with Weapon X. It was simply one of the many outcomes the government expected. They chose people possessing innate skills which could be honed and further experimented on to create the perfect subject, as well as operatives like Logan and Victor Creed, who were part of Team X and fit the bill perfectly. Even before they became Wolverine and Sabretooth as we know them, respectively, they had to undergo a very rigorous training as well as systematic brainwashing and manipulation. The people behind Weapon Plus weren't stupid. They knew that to control a group of operatives like Team X, they would need the right balance of countermeasures, which came in the form of false memories made possible by Cyborg. This arm of the program made sure the operatives would never realize the extent of their own abilities, and in case they went rogue, there was another backup in the form of the Shiva scenario. If this was activated, then heavily armed and armored robots would be dispatched to take care of the rogue soldier in question. We actually see this play out in the episode titled Weapon X Lies in Videotape from X-Men the Animated Series. In the show, this makes Sabretooth question himself because he was no longer certain that he actually had an abusive father, and the mutants realize that the Talos robots will be coming after them indefinitely until they've been destroyed. While the animated series did not feature an exact retelling of the Weapon X experiment, it adapted certain plot lines to get the point across. If you follow the comics, you'll see Team X involved in a number of covert operations across the globe, but it was ultimately disbanded in the late 1960s, following the ill-fated Berlin mission to steal the carbonadium synthesizer. From that point on, Weapon Plus turned its attention to the surviving members to officially recruit them into the Weapon X program. These people already had far greater abilities than normal soldiers, so the plan was to perform experiments to enhance those mutant abilities and, of course, exercise a greater control over their actors. Weapon X itself had quite the rich history because it was derived from the Operation Rebirth program. This was the project that created Captain America, in case that name sounds familiar to you. This program was later designated Weapon 1. Later, Weapon Plus projects used animal, human, and mutant subjects, but their numbering and histories were revealed piecemeal across several comics. Weapon X was eventually identified as the program's 10th major iteration. He was, however, repeatedly passed up when it came to promotions. When Weapon X was finally being discussed, the CIA came on board and Team X materialized. The Adamantium experiment on Logan was not as straightforward as you might think either. It wasn't like he was given orders right after the dissolution of Team X to appear for duty at the Weapon X lab. He was kidnapped and taken to a Weapon X facility as a test subject, and even the professor who had chosen him was surprised at how quickly Logan recovered from the effects of the adamantium being bonded to his skeleton. Inside the facility, the people behind the experiment. The three main names behind the Weapon X experiment were Dr. Abraham Cornelius, Dr. Carol Hines, and the Professor. Cornelius was on the FBI's radar, a disgraced doctor who contributed to several patient fatalities. He was approached by the Professor, who viewed his expertise as vital to the Weapon X program. Hines was an operative who had been working under NASA and probably the most humane of the trio. She was introduced to the program at the same time as Cornelius. The Professor is one of the most mysterious figures here, as he's not referred to by a specific name throughout the issues. According to Marvel, his real name is Truett McDonald Hudson, and he was born a civilian advisor to the United States Army in 1945. At the time, he used the alias Professor Thornton, or Thornton. When he was looking for lost scientific journals in a Nazi concentration camp, he happened to come across Nathaniel Essex's secret lab, and finally, he was recruited to the Weapon Plus program. As I mentioned a while back, Weapon 1 was successful, but Weapons 2 through 9 were not as stable as the original. So when Team X was formed, it was Professor Thornton who acted as the main liaison of Weapon Plus for the operatives, and he was the one overseeing their continuous brainwashing. Wolverine Origins number 33 suggests that it was Romulus who appointed the Professor as the director of the Weapon X project. This is also the issue where his name is Truett Hudson for the first time. I came across an interesting bit of trivia while going through this issue. Did you know that when Nick Fury explained the Hudson family tree, he revealed that Logan, whose real name is James Howlett, is actually a cousin to Truett Hudson through the former's mother. We don't know if the Professor knew about this connection while he was working on Weapon X, since Logan had given up that identity a long time ago. What do you think? Would he have done these things differently if he knew the subject he was experimenting on was a distant cousin? I personally think it wouldn't have made much of a difference, because the Professor's not really a redeemable figure, at least not in my book. He never really saw Logan as an individual in the first place, and this is obvious from how he talks about him in the comics. When Logan was captured, he'd put up quite a fight, which resulted in him getting injured quite a bit. So, when he was being lowered into the vat to prep his body for the experiment, we see the Professor ask, "Is he damaged? Any cuts?" while inquiring about Logan's health. Can you see how dehumanizing this language is? Another panel that caught my eye while reading issue number 73 was when Cornelius remarks that Logan's body was draining adamantium more rapidly than expected because of his healing factor. He specifically used the term more than human to describe this phenomenon. Hearing this, the Professor looked at him with what the kids today call a bombastic side eye. Even though the man didn't respond to that description, the look on his face was enough to convey the idea that he was not at all ready to accept that Logan could be human, much less more than human. Maybe it was because he had already worked with Team X and actively manipulated their memories before, but he just refused to consider them as people. They were nothing but test subjects for the experiment, which also explains his surprise when Logan recovers from the hellish procedure. The Professor may have chosen him because of his healing ability, but he was still completely ready to see Logan die from not being able to handle the trauma. And this is why I keep saying that Barry Windsor-Smith did more than just illustrate this arc. These micro expressions and that deliberate use of damaged instead of hurt or injured were included to highlight the brutality of the experiment beyond just adding shock value for the readers. That way, he didn't just give us a detached third-person account of the process. When it wasn't being narrated through Logan's memories, it felt as if we were physically present in the room, watching everything unfold before our eyes. The bonding process. What happens to Logan's body? X-Men Origins Wolverine brought the adamantium experiment alive on the big screen, but I don't think it was a very honest portrayal, and I'll get into that as well in just a couple minutes. The comics, however, didn't hold back one bit when describing the bonding process. There was no consent from Logan, no explanation of what was about to happen to him, or even the fact that he might have ended up dead. He's captured, his head is shaved, although it starts growing back in less than 20 minutes, as noted by Dr. Hines, and he's stuffed full of sedatives. The panels that actually display the experiment should absolutely come with a warning for trypophobia, and I think this was a deliberate move by the creator, again, to make us feel as uncomfortable as possible. You see, Logan is hooked up to what appears to be at least a few hundred tubes and needles, and is then lowered into a vat containing a pinkish reddish liquid. A tube is fitted over his mouth so that he can breathe, and it's those air bubbles we see rise continuously across the panels, hence the trigger warning I mentioned earlier. Now, in the comics, we only see the outer part of his body and all the tubes and needles attached to it, which pump the adamantium so that it fuses with his bones. And I'm not a medical professional by any means, but just picture this for a second. Do you know just how deep a needle has to go for it to reach your skeleton? And imagine that being done on a scale where it's not just your regular thin IV needle going in. No. These are needles pumping something foreign into your body, into your bones. Something that is fundamentally never meant to go anywhere close to a human being in liquid form. And it's not a viscous liquid either. It is molten metal, which must be maintained at a ridiculously high temperature. Otherwise, it'll solidify and ruin the experiments. I found a fan-made pictorial representation of the adamantium bonding process on Reddit, offering a speculative cross-sectional view of what might have happened inside Logan's body. Initially, a chemical was injected into his bones to prep his skeletal system to receive the adamantium, and then infusion ports were drilled into his skin. Yeah, you heard that right. Drilled into his skin, fat, muscles, until they reached the bone. Molten adamantium was then channeled into his body, and mind you, it solidifies quickly. So a pole-shaped shard of metal was left behind as it took the shape of the infusion tube, embedded in the muscle. This part was then shaved off using adamantium tools while it was still inside Logan's body. These exact medical steps are not established in the comics. If this isn't body horror, I don't know what is. Also, we can't forget that his healing factor was working simultaneously to shield himself through this entire process. See, I have a theory that Logan could actually feel everything that was being done to him because of his mutation. Even though he was sedated, the reason why they needed more adamantium than expected was that his healing ability was draining too much of the metal, which was why Cornelius had remarked that even unconscious, he was a tough guy. And therein lies my question. What if he wasn't unconscious, but simply unable to move or respond while being aware of himself? And finally, when every drop of that scalding metal settled into his system, Logan opened his eyes listlessly and just stared into the distance for a while as the excess adamantium started draining out. He then looked at his hands and the tubes for a few seconds, and we see this not from his perspective, but from that of the people in the lab. He effectively wakes up and has no idea why he's connected to 100 different tubes, like a naked lab animal, and why he probably feels like he's dying as the molten metal now starts to turn into solid adamantium over his bones. Yet, the three people overseeing the experiment only look at the scene from a strictly clinical perspective, reporting on his stats. Suddenly, when blood starts to pour out from his knuckles, they get agitated and try to contact the professor. Amidst the mayhem, one person in the lab points out the obvious. Logan is in a lot of pain and somebody has to go in and help him in some way. But by then, the titular Weapon X was little more than a mindless beast. Razor-sharp spikes erupted from his hands, turning the lab into a scene of bloody massacre, as Logan slaughters everyone he sees. This exhibited exactly how he had been dehumanized, and that was one of the objectives of the experiment as well. What strikes the hardest after all this is how the professor looks at the carnage unfolding through the monitor with a slightly amused look and says one word: magnificent. Really makes you wonder who the dehumanized one is, huh? The conditioning and mind wipe. If you think that the adamantium bonding part is where Logan's trauma ended, you are in for a bitter surprise, my friends. Fusing the indestructible metal to his skeleton was only half of what Weapon X did to him. Most people leave out what happened inside his head, which might just be more gruesome than the horror his body was subjected to. In issue number 75, Cornelius has a rare moment of self-reflection, where he confronts the professor about what they had done to Logan. He says, "Logan could have killed us all." I met his eyes for a second, filled with hate and fury, but I couldn't tell if it was some animal bloodlust or horror at what we had done to him. This interaction is also why I stressed my theory that Logan was able to feel everything that was being done to him, because even Cornelius had his doubts about the man being truly mindless. While he talks to the professor, Logan once again escapes his restraints and is then sprayed with flammable gas to be put down. Of course, this doesn't kill him, and even though it horrifies Dr. Cornelius, who urges the professor to treat Logan more humanely, he's simply told that his next job is to restructure the man. The professor asks him to manipulate the mindless, which is where the next phase of Logan's nightmare begins. In the following issue, we see the three scientists try to communicate with Logan. While Hines and Cornelius are being cautious, for good reason, the professor impatiently asks them to begin quickly so that he can see the feedback of his directives on the screen attached. Obviously, that's easier said than done because even in his mindless state, Logan's pain is able to burn through the circuits until the image that shows up on the monitor is one straight out of a slasher movie. A half-deformed skull with spikes jutting out of every visible surface, with only one resounding word: pain. Logan can utter only one complete sentence, screaming, "What have you done to me?" He then breaks free again, grabbing Hines by the neck, nearly choking her, even though he keeps repeating the same words. You pain to me. The facade of Logan being unconscious while he's experimented on comes off totally in the next few issues, when the professor shocks the rest of the team by clearly saying that Logan can feel everything happening to him, because the pain allows his nervous system to feed them the right data. He's effectively buried under the most intense kind of brainwashing that takes away not just his sense of identity, but pretty much every sense except the instinct to kill. He's left to be attacked by wolves and bears, freeze at sub-zero temperatures, and once the professor drops scalding hot coffee on his face with the same laid-back approach as watering a plant, just to observe how quickly he heals. Within the walls of that lab, and sometimes in its icy, unforgiving surroundings, Logan is conditioned to become a beast that heeds the commands of the professor and no one else. They strip away his memories, dial his senses up until his own instincts overwhelm him, and even plant fake memories in his mind. Can you see how the adamantium they forcibly injected into him was not the worst thing they did? In X Lives of Wolverine number 3 by Benjamin Percy and Joshua Cassara, Marvel sort of reframes this brainwashing to prove that it ended up making Wolverine stronger. When Jean was looking at his past, she said healing factor doesn't apply to his emotions, of course. He's hurting. His body's strong, but his mental defenses are down. Sometimes it's better to forget. Weapon X may have erased or manipulated his existing memories to make him a better weapon for their use, but in some way they also did him a favor. The trauma of his past before his kidnapping and forced bonding were thus forgotten, even though they pumped him full of a different kind of trauma. I don't exactly see how this is a good thing, but, it is what it is, I guess. The escape and apparent massacre. One of the biggest twists in this arc comes when the professor gets a little too haughty about his control over Logan. He even has him take out and retract his claws one by one to show just how obedient a boy Logan is under his careful conditioning. In issue number 79 of Marvel Comics Presents, Logan breaks free and starts attacking all the guards stationed near him, escaping confinement. Cornelius and Hines look on, terror plastered on their faces, and try to contact the professor and ask him to control Logan. But the other man ignores not just their requests, he also dismisses the concerns raised by the security team when they ask for access to heavy weaponry so that they can take Logan down. From the screen monitoring the cameras, Cornelius and Hines watch as Logan kills his way through to the professor's office, surprising both of them. Cornelius remarks that he had shown remarkable tracking skills during controlled situations. But the fact that he was actively looking for the professor, the man behind everything, could only mean that Logan was never under any kind of complete control. The professor keeps talking to this mystery leader over the phone. A clawed hand slashes through the ground of his office, taking away his forearm in the process. Cornelius overrides the chain of command and authorizes security to help the professor and use the full extent of their firepower. But when they get there, they find the man writhing in agony, screaming at them to kill Weapon X. Cornelius and Hines take him to the adamantium reactor hold, since that is the only place Logan won't be able to break through. Since the professor is a cowardly rat through and through, he hands over a gun to Cornelius, allowing him to be killed while he tries to escape. Then he uses Hines as bait to distract Logan, while he tries to kill the weapon he created at the exhaust pit. The small interaction between Logan and Hines is really noteworthy here, because even though she knows it might be useless, she begs him to kill her quickly, as she can't stand physical pain. Logan stops in his tracks for a few seconds, then the unimaginable happens. He says, "You don't matter to me," making it clear that his target, right from the beginning, was none other than the professor himself. Dr. Hines was absolutely complicit in everything, but somehow Logan retained the ability to differentiate between someone who was just following orders and the real mastermind. Or so he thought. Even when the professor makes his last attempt to kill Logan, his flabbers are positively gasted to see that Logan survives. In his terror, the professor starts rambling about how he's the man, and Logan is just a monster. To which he gets a resounding, "I am Logan," in response. Finally, he slowly, painfully pierced through the head with one of Weapon X's claws and thrown into the burning inferno. Happy ending? You should have known better. The next issue opens with Logan getting up from the ground, his mind hazy, as he keeps hearing the conversations that took place while he was rampaging just a few minutes ago. He comes across Cornelius' corpse and feels a tinge of remembrance. The voices start getting louder, and when the claws start to appear, for a second, Logan remembers everything. He says, "They found me out, brought me here, tortured me, tore up my mind. I gotta get away." He starts to run, but his legs feel like putty and fragile twigs at the same time. He feels something grabbing and holding him back, bending his bones, piercing him through every surface of his body. Honestly, for this part, you have to read the thing yourself. I can't do justice to the raw portrayal of trauma, pain, disgust, fear, just everything that the creator brought to life using just a few panels. On one hand, we see Logan's irrationality, or whatever's left of it, trying to make sense of his surroundings and refusing to believe that he's the one who killed all these people. On the other hand, we have the conditioning he was put through, trying to rear its head up and embrace his predatory instincts in their full glory. And just when he makes his way out of the facility, he comes across a Siberian white tiger, which he kills. Voices of Cornelius, Hines, and the professor are heard plainly now, deliberating Logan's actions. Wait, what just happened? We just saw them all being killed, right? Except it was just a simulation that not just fooled Logan, it also fooled us. It was a carefully planned scenario to observe what Weapon X does when he's given the chance to escape. The professor dryly remarks that Logan took mercy on Hines and didn't kill her, while focusing all his attention on who he believed was the main culprit behind his state. Hines replies by saying this only proves that Logan is not a beast that kills indiscriminately. He only attacks when he is threatened or hungry. While the three of them are talking, Logan takes one look at the facility in front of him and enters it. Then Cornelius asks Hines to put Logan back on screen, and the alarm bells go off. The security personnel are unable to locate Logan either, and are informed of a breach in D Block, near the main office. They then advise the three scientists to escape just to be safe, but a set of claws tears through the exit. Logan appears face to face with them, presumably to finish the task he thought he'd already completed. Windsor-Smith leaves the ending open for interpretation, especially regarding the professor's fate. The last we see of Logan is when he trudges his way through the Canadian wilderness, snow covering him, after having broken free from the devices that were controlling him. We know that Hines and Cornelius are alive because the two of them have a very belated conversation about how they have blood on their hands as well. Hines cries and says that if she knew Logan was being forced, she would have refused to join the program. Cornelius agrees, but he knows deep down that he's just as guilty as the professor. Logan escapes, presumably after exacting his revenge, but he will never again be the man that he once was. Wait, the X does not mean what you think it does. Now, I know I sort of explained this a while ago, but that's because I was trying to bridge some of the gaps in continuity. As is the case with all things related to X-Men, the issue of Weapon X is also slightly complicated in this context. Over a few decades, the term Weapon X has come up repeatedly across different comic issues. After Marvel Comics Presents number 72 through 84 was published, another character bearing the moniker was released in Garrison Kane, who debuted in September 1991's X-Force number 2. Then, in 2002, we got a new Weapon X series starring one of the most prominent names of the program, while 2009's Wolverine Weapon X was yet another publication. It was in New X-Men 128 in 2002 that fans were clearly told that the X in Weapon X stood for the Roman numeral 10 and not the alphabet. It was then revealed that Weapon X was simply the 10th attempt of a larger initiative named Weapon Plus. And this revelation tied some of the loose ends left by the earlier comics. The first super soldier of this project, as mentioned, was none other than Captain America. Project Rebirth, which created him, was later termed Weapon 1. I know you're probably not expecting some strange link between Captain America and Wolverine, but they are a part of the same universe, so, why not? This also makes you realize that Logan's case is not a one-off horror story about one man being tortured in a lab. It's simply one of the names in a long ledger of attempts to create the perfect weapon. If Steve Rogers represents the good that can come from such experimentation, Logan is the other side of that same coin. The secret history of Weapon X. By this point, you're probably realizing that Weapon X was never just a lab that gave Wolverine his adamantium claws in a very unhealthy dose of trauma. It grew into something much bigger and darker. A sprawling web of government-backed illegal experiments, mutant operatives, brainwashing, and super soldier research that stretched across decades and multiple countries. After Project Rebirth created one of the most enduring American heroes, the program started experimenting on African Americans such as Isaiah Bradley, one of the very few survivors from Truth, Red, White, and Black. The next weapon, believe it or not, was a squirrel. Yeah, a squirrel who possessed claws like Wolverine, later identified as Weapon 2 in Wolverine and Captain America, Weapon Plus number 1. It only gets worse from here because Weapon 3 was initially a success involving Harry Prizer, a mutant who had multi-sensory skin. He was, unfortunately, betrayed by the program itself, and his skin was claimed by Phantom X to make sentient bullets. You might remember Pizer as the Skinless Man from Uncanny X-Force number 21. During the Vietnam War, the Weapon Plus program's Project Homegrown created another success story in Sergeant Frank Simpson, who was given the name Nuke. This was revealed to us after the first 4 issues of Wolverine Origins. Weapon 13 was Phantom X, who was one of the most successful escapees of Weapon Plus after Wolverine. He was designed to target and kill mutants, but he later rebelled against his overlords and went on to join the X-Force. Then you have Weapon 14, and personally the iteration I find the creepiest, the Stepford Cuckoos, who were designed to wipe out every mutant from the face of the planet. Weapon 15 was Ultimaton, seen in New X-Men number 143, and on paper he seemed like a culmination of all the efforts of the Weapon Plus program up to that point. He was perfect. There was almost nothing wrong with him, except the fact that he was just too perfect, you know? He was sent on a mission to take down Wolverine, Phantom X, and Cyclops. Ultimaton ended up falling prey to existentialism and questioned his very purpose. Finally, he was destroyed in an explosion. Weapon 16 was unveiled in Dark Reign: The List, Wolverine number 1, and given the moniker All God. It was described as a living religion, and any religious person worshipping any religion could immediately be forced to worship Weapon 13 as their new god. So you have Captain America, a squirrel assassin, Wolverine, Deadpool, some creepy telepathic sisters, and a new kind of god. And all of them have one thing in common. They're all a part of the Weapon Plus program. What started as a plan to create a super soldier turned into a race to create an obedient but deadly weapon. Steve Rogers walked into the experiment willingly and came out on the other side as Captain America, loved and remembered by pretty much every Marvel fan. Logan was kidnapped and forced to undergo the process, and once his body was transformed, they went after his mind as well. This is why it's such an interesting parallel to see in Wolverine and Captain America Weapon Plus number 1, where Cap finds Logan crashing to Earth after an assault by an unknown enemy. He's then told by the hologram version of Phantom X, "The patriots that forged you, the monsters that violated Logan, and my own Dr. Frankenstein, so they are the same. Decades of death and destruction can be traced back to you, Captain. You did what you do best. Inspired them." Do you notice the language he used to describe the different stages of the program? The ones who created the Captain were patriots, but with Logan they were simply monsters. This proved how the perfect soldier dream was not fulfilled by Project Rebirth, as Rogers himself believed. It got corrupted, and every attempt that came after him got a little more willing to cut corners on things like, human dignity. I know I gave a condensed version of the history of Weapon Plus here, because we're mainly talking about Weapon X, but if you like a detailed video of the overall program, let me know in the comments and I would be happy to oblige. How Hollywood changed the horror. I mentioned a while back that the movie portrayal of the experiment didn't do justice to what had actually happened. The most glaring departure from the comics is how, in the film, Logan makes a conscious decision to go through with the process, knowing full well that it could be fatal and still ends up surviving. He takes the call because he wants to get strong enough to defeat Victor Creed. There's another tiny detail that in the movies, especially X2, doesn't really explain well. And that's the fact that Logan's retractable bone claws were always part of his anatomy. The experiment simply coated them with adamantium. And thankfully, this detail is rectified in X-Men Origins Wolverine. His autonomy over himself wasn't exactly violated in the way that it was in the Weapon X story arc. He was just not made privy to the fact that his memory was also meant to be erased fully, so that he would become a weapon. He escapes when he overhears this, but by that time, the adamantium was already a part of it. So Hollywood toned down the gruesome bits significantly by not showing that Logan was also mentally tortured and brainwashed into losing his sense of self after the bonding process. It's only at the end of the movie when he gets shot by an adamantium bullet that he loses his memories and can no longer recognize Kayla. When I was younger, I thought Wolverine was the coolest mutant with his rock-hard abs and his kick-ass healing power, and of course, those claws. I realized I matured the day I understood that he's one of the most tragic figures in all of Marvel. He's always suffering, whether it's from the ghosts of his past or from his body tearing up every time he defends himself using his claws. He craves death, but cannot actually be killed by any conventional means. While he has died more than once in the comics and on screen in 2017's Logan, he's dealt with enough death and tragedy to encompass several lifetimes. Wolverine might be your pick for a trial by combat, but the larger context of the X-Men, his abilities often overshadowed by Storm, Jean Grey, Magneto, Mystique, and of course, Professor X himself. I'm not saying that any of these people had it easy, but we sometimes don't consider Logan's power to be theatrical enough, And that's a damn shame. Don't you agree?